From the ashes of the old world comes a chrome rebirth, shining with the light of innovation and a brand new spirit. Experience the powerful transformation of characters as they embrace the future with open arms. Subscribe today and witness the birth of a brand new era in storytelling.
What my son said to me on that Tuesday afternoon in October took less than 30 seconds to speak. It took me 63 years of living to understand exactly what it meant. And what I did about it, what I quietly, carefully, and completely did about it, took my son and his wife the rest of their lives to fully reckon with. My name is Harold Fletcher. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building houses in the hill country of eastern Tennessee. Not managing them, not financing them, building them with my hands, with my crew, with blueprints spread across the hood of a truck and coffee going cold in a paper cup at 6 in the morning. I built 214 homes before I sold my contracting business and retired. I know exactly how many, because I counted them the night my wife, Gloria, passed away. I sat in the driveway of the last house I ever built, and I counted every single one because I needed something to hold on to that night. Something that was mine. Something real. Gloria died 4 years before any of this happened. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from diagnosis to the end. She was the kind of woman who made every room feel 10 degrees warmer just by walking into it. And when she left, the whole world got cold in a way I never quite adjusted to. After she passed, my son Derek called me. He and his wife Melissa had a house in Clarksville, about 2 hours west. They had a son, my grandson Tyler, who was 6 at the time. Derek said, "Dad, you shouldn't be alone out there. Come stay with us." He said it the way you say something when you mean it. Warm. Certain. Like an open door. I should have noticed that Melissa said nothing in the background. I sold the farmhouse Gloria, and I had shared for 22 years. I put the money somewhere Derek and Melissa didn't know about, because Gloria had always told me, "Hal, you keep something for yourself. Always." I thought she was being paranoid. I thought I understood my son. I sold most of the furniture at auction, packed what mattered into a U-Haul, and drove west toward what I believed was family. The room they gave me was above the garage. That's not a complaint. Not yet. It was a real room. It had a window that faced the backyard where Tyler played. It had a bathroom with a shower head that ran cold for the first 2 minutes every morning. I was fine with it. I told myself I was a guest in their home, and guests don't complain about shower heads. What I did not expect was how quickly the word guest stopped applying. By the second month, Melissa had established what she called house rules. There was a list, actually, printed out, laminated. She put it on the back of my door like I was renting a room at a budget motel. No cooking between 9 and 11 in the morning because that was her work-from-home focus time. No television in the common areas after 8 because Derek went to bed early. No having people over without 48 hours notice. No leaving dishes in the sink. No parking my truck in the main driveway because it, and I am using her exact word here, cluttered the appearance of the house. I followed every rule. I parked on the street. I ate breakfast early, or waited until noon. I watched the evening news on my laptop with headphones in, sitting on the edge of my bed like a teenager trying not to wake his parents. And still it wasn't enough. There's a particular kind of dismissal that's worse than open cruelty. It's the kind where you're not attacked. You're simply not acknowledged. Melissa would walk through a room I was sitting in and not look up. Not say good morning. Not register that another human being was present. She did it so consistently, so fluently, that after a while I started to wonder if I had become invisible. I would say her name, and there would be this half-second pause before she answered, like she was deciding whether I was worth the energy. Derek saw it. I know he saw it because I watched him see it, and then I watched him look away. My grandson Tyler was the one bright thing in that house. He was 6 when I arrived and 7 by that first Christmas. He would come up to my room after school and sit on the floor and show me things. Rocks he had found, drawings he had made, A caterpillar in a jar that he was absolutely certain was going to become a butterfly by morning. I taught him how to use a level. I taught him what a load-bearing wall was. I taught him how to play gin rummy, even though he couldn't always remember which cards were which. Those hours with Tyler were the reason I stayed as long as I did. Simple as that. The financial arrangement was explained to me by Melissa, not by Derek, about 6 weeks after I moved in. She sat me down at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and walked me through what she called the household contribution structure. She said that since I was living there, it was only fair that I contribute to expenses. I agreed completely. I asked how much. She said my portion of the monthly household costs came to $1,100. I said that seemed high, but I was willing to discuss it. Then she showed me the legal pad. She had itemized my share of the mortgage, utilities, groceries, streaming services, property insurance, and I need you to understand, I am not exaggerating what she described as depreciation on shared living spaces. I was 61 years old, a retired business owner, and my daughter-in-law had charged me a depreciation fee to sit in her living room. I paid it. Every month. I paid it because I thought of Tyler. I thought of Gloria. I thought that this was simply the friction of blended households and that things would smooth out. What I did not know yet was that Melissa had also quietly requested that my pension deposits be redirected into their joint household account. She had asked Derek to ask me, and Derek had asked me one evening when I was tired, and I had signed something without reading it carefully because I trusted my son. By the time I understood what had happened, she was managing my monthly income like it was hers to manage. They gave me $300 a month as spending money from my own pension. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I want you to understand that I had sold a contracting business. I had accounts Melissa didn't know about. Money Gloria had insisted I keep separate. A safety net. I had spent 20 years building quietly and carefully. I could have walked away financially comfortable at any point. But I stayed because leaving felt like failure. Leaving felt like admitting that my son had become someone I didn't recognize, and I was not ready to admit that yet. The Tuesday in October when everything changed started like any other day. I had picked Tyler up from school because Melissa had a work call and Derek was traveling for his job in Memphis. Tyler wanted to stop at the gas station for a Slurpee, which I bought him. And we sat in my truck in the parking lot, and he told me about a kid at school named Marcus who could burp the alphabet. I told him I could once do the first 8 letters. He made me try. I got to E before my body reminded me I was 63. We drove home laughing. Derek's car was in the driveway when we got back, which surprised me. He was supposed to be gone until Thursday. I walked into the kitchen, and he was sitting at the table with his hands folded. And Melissa was standing at the counter in a way that told me this had been staged. They had positioned themselves. It was a meeting. Tyler sensed it too. Kids always do. He took his backpack upstairs quietly, which was not something Tyler ever did quietly. And I stood in the kitchen doorway and waited. Derek spoke first. He said, "Dad, we need to talk about the financial situation." I sat down. I kept my face still. I had learned in 30 years of business that the person who controls their expression in a hard conversation is the person who controls the conversation. Melissa pushed a folder across the table. Inside were printed spreadsheets, months of expenses, highlighted in yellow and pink. She had done her homework. She said that their monthly overhead had increased significantly since I moved in. She said that Tyler's college fund was being impacted. She said that they were bleeding every month. Then Derek said it. He looked me in the eye, his mother's eyes, Gloria's eyes, and he said, "Dad, you need to stop treating this house like a free ride. Every dollar you spend here is coming out of Tyler's future. You need to think about whether what you're spending is worth it. Every dollar you spend here." I had been paying $1,100 a month plus depreciation. I had been parking on the street. I had been eating breakfast alone and watching television with headphones and staying out of Melissa's focus hours and asking permission before I had so much as a cup of coffee in the afternoon. And my son looked at me and told me I was bleeding them dry. I said, "I understand. I said it quietly. I pushed the folder back across the table, stood up, and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed above the garage and looked out at the backyard, where Tyler had left a bicycle on its side in the grass. The rear wheel was still spinning slowly from when he had dropped it. I watched it until it stopped. I made a decision. I did not make it in anger. I want to be clear about that. I had been angry before when Gloria was sick and there was nothing to fight. When a contractor cheated me out of $60,000 on a subcontracting job in 2009, when the bank tried to deny me a loan I had more than earned. I knew what anger felt like. This was not anger. This was clarity. The wheels stopped spinning, and something in me went quiet and certain, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. I called my attorney the next morning from my truck, parked 3 streets away. Her name was Margaret Oakes, and she had handled my business contracts for 15 years. She was 71, sharp as any person I had ever met. And when I explained my situation, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "Harold, how long have you been putting up with this?" I told her. She said, "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next 11 weeks, I moved carefully and completely. First, I had my pension redirected back to my private account, the one Melissa had never known about. Margaret handled the paperwork and did it in such a way that there was no alert, no notification to the joint account until the first missed deposit, by which point I intended to be gone. Second, I contacted my old business partner Ray Dunham, who had bought me out of the contracting business 3 years earlier. Ray owed me a favor, a substantial one, and he was happy to oblige. He arranged for me to use a small house on his property in Cookville, about 90 miles east. Furnished. Ready. I did not pack a suitcase. Not yet. What I did every day looked exactly the same as before. I ate breakfast early. I parked on the street. I wore my headphones in the evenings. I picked Tyler up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was courteous to Melissa. I was present with my son. I gave them no reason to look at me differently, no reason to suspect that while they sat across from me at the dinner table, I was quietly, methodically, and permanently closing every door. There was one Thursday in November when I almost lost my composure. I came downstairs at 7 in the morning to find Melissa on the phone, and I caught the tail end of what she was saying before she heard me coming. She was talking to her sister. She said, "He's fine here, it's just he's a lot, you know? He's always just there. I feel like we can't breathe in our own house." She turned and saw me, and didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just lowered the phone and said, "Good morning, Harold," in the same tone she used to greet the mail carrier. I said good morning back. I poured my coffee. I went upstairs. I called Margaret that afternoon and told her to accelerate the timeline. The last thing I needed to arrange was the hardest. It was Tyler. I couldn't take him. He wasn't mine to take, and I knew that. And I would not have wanted to do anything that frightened him or confused him or used him as something in a dispute between adults. But I needed him to know that I loved him, and that wherever I went, I was not leaving him. I did it on the last Tuesday I picked him up. We sat in the truck outside his school, engine running, and I told him that I was going to go stay with my friend Ray for a while. I told him his grandmother would have wanted me to have my own space to be comfortable and happy. I told him that he could call me any time, that I was giving him a phone, a small one, prepaid, that I had already activated, and that the only number in it was mine. I told him that when he was old enough, I would explain more. I told him that none of what was happening was about him, and that he was the best thing in my life since his grandmother. He cried a little. He's 8 years old and he tried not to. He said, "You're coming back, right?" I said, "I will always come back for you." I meant it. I still mean it. That Friday, I waited until Derek left for work, and Melissa went into her office for her 9 o'clock focus hour. I went downstairs and washed my breakfast dishes and dried them and put them away. I made the bed. I left the laminated house rules on the desk where Melissa would find them. And then I walked down the stairs and out the side door to my truck, which for the first time in 16 months I had parked in the driveway, and I drove east. I did not call. I did not leave a note. I did not send a text. What I did leave was a letter with Margaret. to be delivered the following Monday morning by certified mail. In it, I explained that I had removed myself from the joint household account, that my pension was no longer available to their household, and that per the terms of my original agreement, which, it turned out, Melissa had not drawn up with any legal standing, I owed them nothing. Margaret had reviewed everything. There was nothing they could recover. There was nothing they could claim. $1,100 a month for 16 months. The depreciation fee, the $300 allowance from my own income, it was gone. And I was gone. And the money they had built their budget around the pension deposit that showed up reliably on the 14th of every month did not arrive. I was on Ray's property in Cookville when Derek started calling. I watched the phone ring 7 times that first Saturday. I did not answer. I listened to the voicemails. The first one was confused. The second one was louder. The third one, and I am going to remember this one for the rest of my life. The third one, he cried. Not angry. Crying. Scared crying. The kind that sounds like a child. He said, "Dad, I don't understand. What did we do? Please just call me back. Please." I sat on the porch of Ray's guest house with a cup of coffee that was the right temperature, and I listened to that voicemail twice. I felt something complicated. I am not going to pretend I didn't. This was my son. I had taught him to ride a bike in the driveway of a house I had built with my own hands. I had sat with him in a hospital waiting room at 2 in the morning when Tyler was born and watched his hands shake with happiness. I had loved this person from the first moment his mother put him in my arms. Loving someone and holding them accountable are not opposites. I had learned that from Gloria. She was better at it than I ever was. She would have managed this whole situation with a grace I couldn't fully match. But I was doing my best. I called Derek back on Sunday. I told him I was safe. I told him I was staying with Ray. I told him that the financial arrangement was ended, that I had consulted an attorney, and that there was nothing to dispute. Then I told him the thing I had spent 16 months trying to find the words for. I said, "Derek, your mother and I raised you to understand that people have dignity, that a person's age doesn't make them less, that you don't take from someone who loves you and call it their contribution. Somewhere between who you were and who you became with Melissa, you forgot those things. I am not going to pretend otherwise anymore, and I am not going to fund a life where I am an inconvenience being managed." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She handled things I didn't agree with. I should have said something." I said, "Yes, you should have." We talked for a long time after that. Not resolved resolution takes longer than one phone call. But the conversation was honest in a way. Nothing between us had been in 16 months, and that mattered. The situation with Melissa was different. She did not call me. What she did was contact her family attorney and ask whether there was any avenue to recover the pension funds that had been redirected. There wasn't. She asked whether my removal from the household constituted any kind of breach. It didn't. She asked about the room above the garage, whether my having lived there created any rights or obligations. Margaret had already anticipated every one of these questions. The answer to all of them was no. What Melissa had never known, what she had never thought to ask about because she had assumed I was simply a retired tradesman living on a pension, was the scope of what I had actually built. The contracting business sale, the investment accounts, the property Gloria and I had purchased in the Smoky Mountains in 1998, which had appreciated considerably in 25 years, and which now generated rental income that exceeded what Melissa had been charging me in depreciation fees every single month. I do not say this to boast. I say it because Melissa had treated me the way she did, based on an assumption that I was dependent, that I needed them more than they needed me, that the power in our arrangement was hers. She had made that assumption, and then she had built a life on top of it. And when it turned out to be wrong, the whole structure came down. Within 4 months of my leaving, Derek and Melissa's household budget had a gap they couldn't fill. Not because of me, I had never been responsible for their actual expenses, only for the inflated contributions Melissa had constructed. But she had incorporated my money into their lifestyle, and lifestyles are hard to downgrade. I heard about the house going on the market through Ray, who heard it from someone at his church in Clarksville. I didn't feel satisfaction about it exactly. I felt something more like sorrow. Not for Melissa, she had made choices I could not excuse, but for Derek. And for Tyler, who did not deserve instability in his home because the adults around him had made poor decisions. I called Derek the week I heard. I told him that Tyler was welcome to come stay with me in Cookville for the summer, if that would help during the transition. I told him that my door, my actual door, which I had opened myself and which nobody had put rules on, was always open to him too, if he wanted to talk. He brought Tyler to Cookville in June. I want to tell you about that first morning. Tyler woke up early. He always has. And I heard him downstairs before 6. I came down and found him standing at the window of the kitchen looking out at the hill behind Ray's property where deer came down to the tree line at dawn. There were 3 of them that morning, a doe and 2 younger ones. Tyler was completely still, watching them. The way children are completely still, only when something is genuinely astonishing to them. I stood in the doorway and I did not say anything, and neither did he. After a while he said, without turning around, "Grandpa, did you know deer can run 40 miles an hour?" I said I did know that. He said, "That's almost as fast as your truck." I said almost. We watched the deer until they moved back into the trees. Then I made pancakes and Tyler set the table without being asked. And we ate breakfast together with no rules on the back of any door and no schedule to observe and no one monitoring what time I started cooking. Some things cannot be undone. I know that. The 16 months I spent parking on a street I didn't have to park on, eating alone, watching my son look away, those months are inside me and they will stay there. I am 63 years old. I don't have months to waste on dignity I have to beg for. But some things can be rebuilt. They take longer than a single phone call. They require the person who did the damage to understand what they did, and not just to say sorry because they're suffering consequences. Real understanding is rarer and slower. Derek is working toward it. I can see it in the way he talks to me now, less like I'm a problem to be managed, more like I'm his father. We have a long way to go, but the direction has changed. And Tyler calls me on the prepaid phone every few days. He tells me about Marcus, who has now allegedly burped 11 letters consecutively, a claim I remain skeptical of. He tells me about the caterpillar that did, eventually, become a butterfly. He tells me he wants to come back to Cookville in August because Ray has a fishing pond and Tyler has decided he is going to learn to fish. I told him I would teach him. I told him we would get up early and go out before the sun was fully up and the fish were still moving. I told him to bring boots because the bank gets muddy. He said, "Grandpa, did you know some fish can live for over 100 years?" I said I did know that. He said, "That's almost as old as you." I told him that was not even close to funny. He laughed for a long time. What I want you to understand if you are listening to this and you are in a house where you are tolerated rather than welcomed, where your presence is a line item rather than a blessing, where someone has looked at you and decided that your worth is measured in what you contribute to their budget, what I want you to understand is this. The money was never the point. The money was just the language they used, because they thought it was the only language I would understand. Dependency was the real architecture of what they built. They needed me to believe I needed them. The moment I stopped believing that, the whole arrangement became untenable. Not for me, for them. I built 214 homes. I know something about what holds a structure up. I know that you cannot build a life on a foundation that requires someone else's silence to stay standing. Eventually, the silence ends. Eventually, the person you have been managing walks out to their truck one Friday morning and drives east and does not come back. And the structure, every inflated expense and laminated rule and power arrangement and assumption comes down. I am sitting on the porch of Ray's guest house right now. The hills behind the property are changing color because it is October again, a full year after that Tuesday in Derek's kitchen, and the trees up here do not know anything about any of that. The coffee is hot. The morning is quiet. I have nowhere to be, nothing to prove, no schedule to observe. My name is Harold Fletcher. I am 63 years old. I built what I built with my own hands. I kept what mattered where nobody could take it. And when my son told me I was bleeding him dry, I smiled, and I drove east, and I have not looked back since.